Before start this interesting story, please subscribe our Mood Freeze channel and like and share also, and be sure to comment to get a story that you like.
The first time I saw her, it was dusk. The street lamps on Maplewood Lane had just flickered on, scattering pale light across the cracked sidewalks and overgrown hedges. I was coming back from work, juggling a bag of groceries in one hand and my keys in the other, when I noticed the moving truck parked outside the old Lambert house. For years, the house had stood empty, a two-story Victorian relic with peeling paint and shuttered windows. Neighborhood kids swore it was haunted. Adults just said it was too much work to bother with. But now, someone was finally moving in. She stood at the edge of the driveway, slim and still, watching as two men carried boxes up the front steps. From a distance, she looked younger than me, late 20s maybe, but there was something about the way she held herself. Rigid, alert, almost like a soldier surveying new territory. I slowed down, more curious than I should have been. The woman noticed me immediately. Her gaze was sharp and quick, landing on me with unnerving precision. "Evening," I said, forcing a smile. Her lips curved slightly, but it wasn't quite a smile. "Hello." Her voice was low and smooth, but her eyes never softened. "Moving in, huh? You picked quite a house." "Yes," she said simply. "It's perfect." Before I could say anything else, one of the movers called her name. Clara. She turned back toward the house, ending the conversation as efficiently as closing a book. I walked on, unsettled but intrigued. Over the next few days, I couldn't help noticing her habits. From my kitchen window, I had a clear view of her house. She rarely went out during the day. At night, though, the lights flickered on from room to room, as if she were pacing or searching for something. I never saw her draw the curtains. On the third evening, while taking out the trash, I spotted her again. She was standing in her yard, staring up at the sky. No phone in hand, no cigarette, no drink, just staring. I hesitated, then waved. "Hi, Clara?" Slowly, her head tilted toward me. Her face was pale in the streetlight, her eyes darker than I remembered. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she gave a small nod. "Do you need any help settling in?" I offered. "I mean, if you need tools or—" "No," she interrupted. "I don't need anything." The tone was final. Still, I thought I caught a flicker of something else behind her words. Fear, maybe, or loneliness. The neighborhood had opinions, of course. "Strange one, isn't she?" whispered Mrs. Dalton, the elderly woman 2 doors down. "Doesn't speak much. Never sees anyone." "Probably just private," said Greg, the mailman, though even he admitted she never answered the door when he rang for a signature. One evening at the local diner, I overheard a couple of regulars talking. "That house," one muttered. "People don't stay there long. 3 families in 10 years. Always leave in a hurry." The other shook his head. "Bad luck, maybe, or worse." I tried to brush it off, but unease curled in my stomach. A week later, I decided to introduce myself properly. I baked a batch of cookies, a little cliché maybe, but harmless. Carrying the plate, I crossed the street and knocked on her door. At first, there was no answer. I was about to leave when the door creaked open an inch. Clara stood there, shadowed by the dim light inside. "Yes?" "Hi, I just thought I'd welcome you to the neighborhood." I held out the plate. "Cookies." She looked at them as if they were foreign objects. After a pause, she opened the door wider and took them carefully, like someone handling fragile glass. "Thank you," she said softly. I smiled, encouraged. "If you ever need anything, I'm right across the street." Her eyes lingered on me a second too long, as if weighing something. Then she whispered, "Be careful." My smile faltered. "Sorry." Her expression shifted, almost embarrassed. "I mean, thank you. Good night." She closed the door gently but firmly. I stood there, plateless and unsettled. "Be careful." That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself looking out the window toward Clara's house. Around midnight, I saw movement. her silhouette passing across the upstairs window again and again, back and forth, pacing. Then she stopped. The light in her room flickered, then went out. A few seconds later, I saw it. Another figure in the window, taller, broader. For a moment it stood there, perfectly still, before vanishing into the dark. I blinked hard, heart thudding. Was I imagining it? Maybe it was just a reflection. Maybe I was tired. But the next morning, when I glanced outside, Clara was standing in her yard again, her face turned toward my house. She wasn't moving, just watching. And when our eyes met, she smiled for the first time. The smile was not reassuring. It was a warning. The first week after Evelyn moved in passed in an oddly quiet haze. Sarah noticed that she never saw Evelyn during the day. Curtains remained drawn, windows latched tight, and the house, despite its new occupant, looked like it was trying to swallow itself whole. Sarah didn't want to admit it, but she had developed a fascination with her new neighbor. She told herself it was harmless curiosity. After all, wasn't it natural to wonder about the woman who had slipped so silently into the house next door, the one nobody had touched for years? One night, nearly midnight, Sarah awoke to the sound of something faint drifting through her bedroom window. At first, she thought it was the wind carrying stray sounds, perhaps a dog barking in the distance, or a car crawling down the main road. But as she strained her ears, she realized it was neither. It was a voice, a woman's voice. She sat up in bed, heart fluttering. Evelyn's house stood just beyond the hedge outside her window. The voice came from there, floating soft and strange in the dark. At first it sounded like humming, a low, tuneless melody that reminded Sarah of lullabies sung off-key. But soon words began to form. "Not here. Not now. You promised me." The voice was steady, but broken by pauses, as though Evelyn were whispering to someone unseen. Sarah pressed herself against the window pane, listening harder. She heard another sound then, a reply. Only it didn't sound like Evelyn. It was deeper, raspier, like the dragging of a shovel across gravel. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders and told herself she was imagining it. After all, sound traveled strangely at night. Perhaps Evelyn was on the phone. A visitor. There were rational explanations. She couldn't stop listening. This went on for nearly an hour, rising and falling like waves against the shore. Then, abruptly, silence. She sat in her bed, stiff with unease. Her hand hovered near her phone. She considered calling the police, but what would she say? Was talking to someone at midnight? That whispers frightened her? Her off, or worse, think she was paranoid. Morning, Sarah walked to her car with deliberate calm, forcing herself not to glance at Evelyn's house. Curiosity got the better of her. She slowed her steps, eyes drifting over the windows. It was when she noticed it. Usually drawn, had a gap, and in that narrow opening, Sarah thought she saw a pale face staring directly at her. Keys clutched in her hand. Vanished in a blink, curtain snapping shut. Came a voice behind her. Jumped. It was Mrs. Henley from 2 doors down, clutching her gardening gloves. The woman gave her a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The new neighbor yet?" she asked. She shook her head. "Not really. Just glimpses." "Keep it that way." Mrs. Henley leaned in, lowering her voice. "Things happen in that house. Always have." Asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Flickering at odd hours, visitors who never stay long, and once, Mrs. Henley hesitated. A boy from the neighborhood swore he saw someone digging in the backyard at night, but when the police checked, there was nothing. She laughed nervously, hoping it would cover her growing unease. Probably just kids making up stories. Henley didn't laugh. She simply tightened her gloves and walked away, muttering something about people never changing. Sarah tried to convince herself she was overreacting. Dinner, watched television, and distracted herself with emails. As the clock crept toward midnight, she couldn't help but notice the faint hum of sound drifting once again from Evelyn S. house. Her own lights and stood by the window, hidden in the dark. Hers were back. Time, Sarah heard something new. Rhythmic thudding, like footsteps pacing across the wooden floor. Sharp sound like a chair toppling. Evelyn's voice rose, trembling with fear. "Please, don't." Cut off abruptly. It pounded in her chest. She fumbled for her phone, fingers trembling. She could dial. The lights in Evelyn's house flickered on. Through a slit in the curtain, she saw Evelyn standing alone in her living room. Speaking. She wasn't moving. She stood there, staring into the corner of the room, as if transfixed by something Sarah couldn't see. Breath caught. As though sensing she was being watched, Evelyn turned her head toward Sarah's window. Their eyes met across the hedge. Expression was blank, her face ghostly in the dim light. Stumbled backward, pulling the curtains shut. In the dark, clutching her phone, but unable to make the call. Never came that night. Morning, exhaustion weighed heavy on her. She told herself she would knock on Evelyn's door, introduce herself, maybe ask if everything was all right. Finally worked up the courage, she found the front steps bare, the door shut tight. The box was empty. It was untouched. It looked deserted. Pressed her ear against the door, she swore she heard a faint whisper from inside. Low and ragged, saying her name. Back, pulse hammering in her ears. Time since Evelyn had moved in, Sarah realized the truth that had been gnawing at her gut all along. Happening next door, it wasn't just strange, dangerous. The morning after the storm, Maplewood Lane seemed strangely quiet. The usual chorus of birds was muted, the air heavy with dampness, and the street was slick with rainwater that had yet to drain. Emily stood at her kitchen window sipping coffee, her gaze fixed on the house across the street. Mr. Blackwood's blinds were drawn tight, every window shuttered. Normally, even at odd hours, Emily could catch a glimpse of him, sitting by the window, reading, or pacing in the yard as though searching for something. But today, his house looked abandoned. Emily frowned. Hadn't she heard noises last night? Strange scraping, followed by a loud thud. She had been too afraid to check, convincing herself that the storm explained the sounds. Now, the silence unnerved her more than the noises had. By mid-morning, the neighborhood buzzed with speculation. Mrs. Hargrove, always the first to sniff out gossip, stopped Emily as she brought out her trash bin. "Did you hear?" she whispered, her eyes gleaming. "Hear what?" Emily asked, gripping the bin's handle. "Mr. Blackwood. Nobody's seen him all morning. His car's gone, but the house looks wrong." Emily tried to laugh it off. "Maybe he went out early." Mrs. Hargrove shook her head. "Not in this weather, dear. Besides, I peeked into his driveway. His car's still there, covered in wet leaves." The words sent a shiver through Emily. Maybe he's just inside. Or maybe... Mrs. Hargrove leaned closer. "He's not." Emily forced a polite smile and escaped back into her house, though her heart raced. She wasn't one for rumors, but she couldn't shake the image of Mr. Blackwood's empty windows. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The wind had settled, but the eerie quiet of the neighborhood kept her on edge. Around midnight, she heard it again, the scraping noise. This time, louder, closer. She pushed herself out of bed and crept to the window. Across the street, Mr. Blackwood's front door was ajar. It swayed slightly in the breeze. No lights were on inside. Emily's breath caught. Should she call someone? The police? But what would she say? "Hi, my neighbor's door is open and I'm scared of shadows." She waited, gripping the curtain, half expecting him to appear and shut the door. But no one came. After nearly 15 minutes of watching, Emily backed away, her unease deepening. The next morning, curiosity overcame her. She decided to check. Crossing the street felt like stepping into another world. The Blackwood house loomed, its paint peeling, ivy crawling along the sides. Up close, Emily realized just how neglected it looked, though she had never noticed from afar. She hesitated at the threshold. "Mr. Blackwood?" she called softly. Silence. Her eyes adjusted to the dimness inside. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew and something else, metallic, sharp. She wrinkled her nose. "Mr. Blackwood?" She tried again, her voice trembling. She stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under her weight. A stack of old newspapers sat near the door, yellowed and damp. Dust coated every surface, as though no one had cleaned in months. Yet Emily could have sworn he moved in only weeks ago. Room by room, she peeked in. The kitchen was bare. No dishes, no food. The living room held a single chair by the window and nothing else. No television, no shelves, not even curtains. Just that chair facing the street, as though he had spent hours watching. Her pulse quickened. She moved upstairs, each step heavier than the last. At the end of the hall was a door, slightly ajar. Emily pushed it open and froze. The room was empty, except for a small wooden box in the center of the floor. On top of it lay a single scrap of paper. Emily's hands shook as she picked it up. The note, written in spidery handwriting, read, "I was never here." Emily stumbled backward, heart hammering. None of it made sense. Why would a man move into a house, fill it with almost nothing, then vanish, leaving behind a note that denied his existence? She grabbed the box, her instinct telling her not to leave it behind. It was surprisingly light, but she didn't dare open it there. She hurried out, locking the door behind her, though she didn't know why. Back home, she set the box on her kitchen table and just stared at it. Part of her wanted to open it immediately. Part of her wanted to call the police, and part of her wanted to pretend none of this was happening. Finally, she lifted the lid. Inside was a bundle of photographs. She picked one up. It was her house, taken from across the street. Another showed her walking to her mailbox. Another, sitting in her living room with the curtains half drawn. Emily's stomach dropped. There were dozens of photos, all of her. Every angle, every moment, captured without her knowing. And the last one, taken through her bedroom window while she slept. Her hand flew to her mouth, muffling a cry. The box slipped from her fingers, spilling the photographs across the table. Emily staggered back, her thoughts spinning. Mr. Blackwood hadn't disappeared. He had been watching her, studying her, and now he was gone, without a trace, without explanation. But if he had vanished, who took the last photo? That night, Emily couldn't bring herself to close her eyes. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the glass made her flinch. She had locked every door and window, but the photographs haunted her. Sometime around 3 a.m, she heard it again. The scrape. But this time, it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside her house. The morning after the streetlight incident, Emily awoke with the unsettling heaviness of unresolved questions. She replayed the strange sequence of events in her mind. The flickering light, the shadowed figure that seemed to vanish in an instant, and the soft, echoing thud that had followed. None of it made sense. By the time she looked out her window again, the street was still, as though nothing had happened at all. Sleep had been patchy and filled with restless dreams, images of doorways that opened into endless darkness, of whispers that seemed to follow her wherever she went. She had almost convinced herself it was stress, her imagination weaving nonsense out of late-night paranoia. Almost. That day, she decided she couldn't continue living in uncertainty. If something was happening in Mr. Grayson's house, she needed to know. Curiosity wasn't the only force driving her. It was concern, too. He was, after all, an old man living alone. What if he was sick or in danger? Emily waited until mid-afternoon, when the neighborhood was at its quietest. Most of the families were at work, the children at school. The air smelled faintly of cut grass, though Mr. Grayson's lawn was still overgrown. She walked across the street, her steps light, and paused at his gate. The iron latch felt colder than she expected. The path to his front porch was lined with cracked stone tiles. When she climbed the steps, she noticed how the wood groaned under her weight. Everything about the house seemed older up close, as if it were clinging to a past it refused to leave behind. Emily knocked once, gently. No answer. She tried again, louder this time, but the silence inside remained unbroken. She hesitated, then reached for the doorknob. To her surprise, it turned easily. The door creaked open, releasing a draft of air so stale it made her cough. "Mr. Grayson," she called into the dim hallway. Her voice sounded too loud, bouncing back at her in a way that made the space feel cavernous, even though she could see the narrow corridor stretching only a few feet ahead. No response. Emily took a tentative step inside. The first thing she noticed was the smell, a mixture of dust, something metallic, and something else she couldn't quite place. The floorboards groaned under her shoes as she moved deeper into the house. The hallway walls were lined with old photographs, their frames tarnished and crooked. Most of the pictures were of landscapes, forests, mountains, rivers. None featured people. She wondered if Mr. Grayson had ever had a family, or if he had always been alone. Her eyes caught on a door to her left, slightly ajar. She nudged it open and found herself in the living room. The curtains were drawn tight, allowing only thin slices of light to cut across the dust that floated in the air. Furniture was sparse and outdated. A sagging sofa, a low wooden table covered with unopened envelopes, and a heavy armchair facing an unplugged television. It didn't feel like anyone had been living there. And yet, there were signs of life. A half-empty glass of water sat on the table. A single slipper lay on the carpet, as though someone had been interrupted mid-step. Emily's skin prickled. "Hello?" she called again, softer this time, as though she wasn't sure she wanted to be heard. The silence answered back. She moved cautiously through the house. The kitchen was neat, too neat, pots polished and stacked, plates spotless, cupboards almost bare. She noticed the fridge was humming faintly but empty except for a lone jar of pickles. Something about the place felt off, wrong in a way she couldn't explain. It wasn't just that it was quiet, it was hollow, as though the house itself was only pretending to be lived in. Emily's attention was drawn to the staircase at the end of the hall. It was narrow, the banister worn smooth from years of use. A cold draft seemed to seep from the second floor. She hesitated, then forced herself to climb. Each step groaned loudly, echoing through the emptiness. At the top, a long corridor stretched before her, lined with closed doors. She picked one and pushed it open. A bedroom. The bed was neatly made, the sheets tucked tightly. On the dresser sat an old-fashioned clock, ticking steadily, but the hands were stuck at 3:17. A wardrobe loomed in the corner, its door slightly ajar. Emily couldn't resist pulling it open. Inside, there were only a few items of clothing, all dark, all neatly pressed. She shut it quickly, unsettled. The second door revealed what looked like a study. Stacks of books lined the walls, many of them old and worn. Papers were scattered across a desk, but they weren't written in any language Emily recognized. Strange symbols, looping and angular, filled the pages. She picked one up and frowned, her eyes tracing the cryptic script. It reminded her of something ancient, almost ritualistic. A sudden creak in the hallway made her freeze. She wasn't alone. Her heart pounded as she placed the paper back and turned slowly toward the door. But when she stepped into the hall, it was empty. The only movement was the faint sway of a curtain at the far end of the corridor, stirred by the draft. Still, the feeling lingered. Someone was watching her. Emily's instincts screamed at her to leave, but curiosity pulled her toward the last door at the end of the hall. It was different from the others. Painted a darker shade, its handle oddly polished as though it was used more often. She reached for it, hand trembling. The door was locked. She tried again, jiggling the handle, pressing her shoulder against it, but it wouldn't budge. Leaning closer, she thought she heard something from the other side, a faint rhythmic sound, almost like breathing. Her stomach dropped. Suddenly, the floorboard behind her creaked. She spun around, but the corridor was still empty. The silence that followed was suffocating. Emily didn't wait any longer. She turned and hurried down the stairs, her footsteps loud and uneven. When she reached the front door, she pulled it open so quickly it slammed against the wall. She stumbled out into the sunlight, gasping for air as though she'd been holding her breath the whole time. Her own house had never felt safer than it did when she rushed inside and locked the door behind her. From her window, she looked back at Mr. Grayson's home. The curtains were still drawn, the house silent, giving away nothing of what she had just experienced. But Emily knew one thing for certain. Whatever secrets lay behind those closed doors were far darker than she had imagined. For days after his break-in at Miss Holloway's house, Daniel couldn't sleep. Every time he shut his eyes, he saw the strange ledger again. The names scrawled with ruthless precision, the dates beside them, and the chilling certainty that something was being recorded, tracked, or perhaps ended. He replayed the scene 100 times in his mind. The dust-choked air of her study, the faint smell of old varnish, the silence that pressed down like a weight, and, most of all, that locked drawer he hadn't dared to open. But the ledger alone was enough to confirm his worst fear. Eleanor Holloway hadn't simply been a lonely old woman. She had been involved in something secretive, maybe even sinister, and her disappearance wasn't random. Restless obsessions. The neighborhood seemed unchanged to the casual eye. Kids still biked down the street, sprinklers hissed over the lawns, and porch lights flickered on at dusk. But for Daniel, nothing felt the same. Every creak of his house, every shifting shadow outside his window seemed suspicious. He started keeping a notebook of his own, just like Miss Holloway's, filled with observations. When the mailman skipped her house, when a light flickered unexpectedly inside, when a black sedan appeared and parked down the block for hours. The sedan unsettled him most. It came late at night, idling near the Holloway place with its lights off. By the time Daniel built up the courage to approach, it would vanish into the dark. His friends stopped answering his calls, tired of his obsession. Even Sarah, his closest confidant, began to worry. "You're not eating, you're not sleeping, and you're starting to sound crazy," she told him one evening. "Maybe she just moved away. Maybe it's that simple." But Daniel shook his head. "You didn't see the ledger, Sarah. Something was happening in that house." The breakthrough. It was the sound of paper tearing that finally gave him a clue. He'd gone back to Holloway S. house one more time, telling himself it would be the last. Creeping through the back door he'd already pried open once. Dust floated through the air like ghosts. He moved cautiously, flashlight trembling in his hand. This time, instead of the study, he explored the upstairs bedroom. The air smelled faintly of lavender, as though she had left only yesterday. The bed was neatly made, a silk scarf draped across the pillow. But when Daniel leaned against the dresser, one of the drawers jolted open and spilled its contents. Inside were dozens of envelopes, all addressed in the same neat handwriting. Most were unopened, but one had been ripped in half. Daniel picked up the pieces carefully, aligning them together. The return address made his heart race. The Orpheus Society. It wasn't a name he recognized, but the words carried weight, like something official but secretive. The letter itself was cryptic, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. Your work has not gone unnoticed. The ledger must remain secure. We will send someone soon to collect what you have safeguarded. Daniel's blood ran cold. The ledger hadn't just been hers. It belonged to someone else, or to something larger. And now they wanted it back. A visit in the dark. That night the sedan returned. Daniel was waiting, crouched by his living room window. Two men stepped out, dressed in plain suits. They moved with quiet efficiency, heading straight for the Holloway house. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He grabbed his phone, thumb hovering over 911, but froze. What would he even say? Instead, he slipped outside and followed them, keeping to the shadows. The men entered through the back door as if they had a key. Within minutes, the faint glow of flashlights danced across the second-floor windows. Daniel crept closer, heart in his throat. Then came the sound of splintering wood. They had found the study. They were after the ledger. Daniel hesitated. He could run back, call the police, and maybe pretend he'd seen nothing. But his gut told him that once the ledger was gone, the truth about Miss Holloway would vanish with it. So he did the unthinkable. He slipped inside the house after them. The final clue. The study door was ajar, and he peered inside. The two men were pulling drawers open, rifling through papers. One muttered, "It has to be here." Daniel scanned the room desperately until his gaze fell on the grandfather clock in the corner. Something about its face seemed off. Its hands frozen at midnight, its pendulum still. He remembered the way the clock had ticked during his first visit, steady and relentless, and realized it had been wound deliberately. Moving silently, he pressed against the frame. With a groan of hinges, the entire front swung open to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside lay the ledger, bound in leather, and beneath it, a single photograph. The picture showed Miss Holloway in her younger days, standing beside a group of people in dark robes. Before Daniel could retreat, the floor creaked under his weight. Both men snapped their heads around. "There," one barked. Daniel grabbed the ledger and bolted. Flight into the night. The chase was instant and furious. He barreled down the stairs, clutching the book like it was life itself. Behind him, heavy footsteps thundered. He burst through the back door, sprinting across the lawn, the men shouting after him. The cool night air stung his lungs, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He vaulted over his fence, stumbled, and scrambled to his feet. By the time he reached his own house, he was shaking, his shirt torn, his hands scraped raw. He slammed the door shut and locked it, leaning against the wood as his heart pounded. The ledger lay on his kitchen table, silent and ominous. He dared to open it again, flipping past the names until he reached the final page. There, in crisp, deliberate ink, was a date that hadn't come yet. Tomorrow's date. And, beside it, his own name. Daniel staggered back, the room spinning. He had uncovered the final clue, but it wasn't a revelation. It was a death sentence. Miss Holloway hadn't just disappeared. She had been silenced. And now they were coming for him. The morning after discovering the old photograph and journal, Emily sat at her kitchen table, staring at the objects like they might answer her questions if she just looked long enough. The photograph of the young man, so eerily similar to David, rested beside the brittle pages of the journal. Her coffee had gone cold, untouched. She traced the faded ink with her finger. The journal spoke of betrayal, of a man who, vanished after discovering secrets about his neighbors. Secrets they didn't want exposed. The chilling part. The writer described how the community had closed ranks, pretending the man had never existed. Emily's mind reeled. Had this all happened before? Was David just the newest piece of a cycle that spanned decades? She stuffed the photograph and journal into her bag. She needed answers, and there was only one place left to go. The abandoned house at the end of the street. The house everyone avoided, the one that seemed to hum with silence even in daylight. The house at the end. The air grew colder as Emily approached. The house sagged under years of neglect, shutters loose, paint peeling, and ivy choking its edges. She hesitated at the gate, feeling the weight of 100 eyes though no one was around. Inside, dust coated everything, disturbed only by faint footprints. Someone had been here recently. Emily's pulse quickened. She wandered from room to room, searching until she reached a back study. Papers were scattered across the floor. Newspaper clippings, old photographs, yellowing letters. She knelt down, her eyes skimming over headlines. Local man disappears, no leads. Authorities close case amid lack of evidence. Family speaks out, it's like he never existed. Her stomach turned as she realized the clippings spanned decades. The disappearances weren't random. They were patterns, each one tied to this neighborhood. And then she saw it. A clipping from only a year ago, barely remembered in the back of her mind. Another man. Different face, same street. The article called him a quiet neighbor who kept to himself. Emily whispered, "Oh my God. It's always been here." The hidden door. In the corner of the study, behind a warped bookshelf, she noticed faint scuff marks. She pushed, and with a groan, the shelf shifted, revealing a narrow door. Her breath caught. With trembling hands, she pulled it open. A staircase spiraled down into darkness. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but something stronger pushed her forward. The need to know. The need to finish what David had started. She flicked on her phone's flashlight and descended. The air grew damp, thick with the smell of earth and mold. The narrow passage opened into a stone chamber, its walls lined with shelves stacked with more files, photos, and journals. At the center stood a table, and on it, a single item, a leather-bound ledger. She flipped it open. Names, dates, addresses, all belonging to people who had lived in the neighborhood and then disappeared. Each entry was marked with a final word. Erased. Her hands shook violently as she turned the pages, and then she saw the last entry. David Thompson. Erased. Her blood went cold. The voices in the dark. A faint creak echoed from above. Emily froze, clutching the ledger to her chest. Someone was in the house. She killed the flashlight and crouched in the shadows, her heart hammering. Footsteps descended the stairs, measured, deliberate. A lantern's glow flickered across the chamber walls. "Emily," a voice called softly. It was familiar. Too familiar. She swallowed hard. Out of the darkness stepped Mrs. Holloway, the sweet elderly woman who always baked cookies for the block parties. Only now, her face looked sharper, her eyes gleaming with something cold and ancient. "You weren't supposed to find this," Mrs. Holloway said, her tone calm, almost regretful. "We tried to keep you out of it." Emily clutched the ledger tighter. What happened to David? What happened to all of them? Mrs. Holloway sighed. They knew too much. This neighborhood, it survives because we protect it. Outsiders come, they ask questions, they dig where they shouldn't. And when they do, we make sure their stories end before they spread. Emily's chest tightened. "So you erase people?" Mrs. Holloway tilted her head. "Erase is just a word. We preserve balance. And now, my dear, you've read too much." A desperate escape panic surged through Emily. She bolted toward the stairs, but more figures emerged from the shadows. Mr. Carson from across the street, the quiet couple from the corner house, faces she had known for years. Their expressions were blank, unified, as though part of something greater. She darted to the side, knocking over a stack of boxes. The distraction gave her a narrow path, and she sprinted up the stairs, the ledger clutched to her chest. Voices shouted behind her, but adrenaline carried her through the study, through the hall, out into the biting night air. Her lungs burned as she tore down the street toward her house. She didn't dare look back, though she could feel them, a wall of eyes following. The final revelation. Once safely inside, Emily locked the doors, shoved a chair under the knob, and collapsed onto the floor, gasping. She opened the ledger again, forcing herself to look at the last page. Beneath David's name, a new line had appeared in the same handwriting. Emily Harper. Erased. Her body went cold. She dropped the ledger as if it had burned her. Somehow, impossibly, they already knew. She hadn't escaped. The phone rang, shrill in the silence. She staggered to her feet and picked it up. A familiar voice whispered on the other end. "Run." It was David. The line went dead. The vanishing truth. Emily stood frozen, the phone trembling in her hand. Was David alive? Was he warning her from somewhere beyond reach? Or had she just heard the final trick of a neighborhood that thrived on lies? Outside her window, porch lights flicked on one by one, every house in perfect unison. She backed away from the glass, her mind spiraling. The truth was clear now. The disappearances weren't random, weren't accidents. They were deliberate. The neighborhood itself was a machine designed to erase anyone who got too close. And now her name was written. The vanishing truth wasn't about David. It wasn't about the others. It was about her.